action, with more announcements to come by working with industry and communities that are advancing economic development, and I'll be pleased to do that as we move forward in the coming weeks to detail fully what the members asked for.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Education. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's been said that the quality of any society is measured by its ability to look after those people in need. And unfortunately, this government, Mr. Speaker, has failed seniors in long-term care facilities, the people in the gallery, and the person that I'm going to talk about, a student with which I have been corresponding with the Minister. You see, Mr. Speaker, the child's parent has been trying to secure a productive learning environment for a learning disabled child. He's made no progress in the local school, and in fact, he developed behavioral problems. The single parent cashed in her RSPs and enrolled the child in St. Thomas Aquinas School, and his improvement since that time has been marked. She cannot afford this, and her request for the school to enter into a tuition agreement has been denied. So I want to ask the Minister, will the Minister advise why he has washed his hands of my request that he get involved in this matter?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for the question. The honourable member would appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that the authority with respect to tuition agreements is a matter that lies with the school boards, and we, by authority of the Act, provide funding to the school boards, and it is their decision with respect to the appropriation of that money.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, the Minister repeats the answer that he gave me in writing some time ago. Well, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that the Education Act gives such unfettered discretion to school boards. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, Section 68(2) says that the Minister can act to protect the educational welfare of a student in a school. This should apply, Mr. Speaker, to the issue of tuition agreements as well. So I want to ask the Minister why he has decided not to exercise his discretion in favor of protecting this child's educational welfare.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I indicated, the view of the authority which I have under the Act is the advice that I am given is obviously different than the advice the honourable member is giving to the House today, and we know that his legal opinions have not been consistent with ours so far in this question period. That is not to say, Mr. Speaker, that we don't take this issue very seriously. It's an issue that we're continuing to address. And we are working with the groups that are involved in this, and it's a matter, obviously, that as we develop our capacity to recognize deficiencies, we need to develop a capacity to respond, and we are working in that direction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, this young boy won't be able to wait until the department develops its capacity to respond. Each year, Mr. Speaker, this young boy will age. He will pass through the system either successfully or unsuccessfully. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that he made remarkable progress at St. Thomas Aquinas School, progress that they believe will be jeopardized if his mother is forced to put him back into the local school. This family needs a tuition agreement to provide what is needed for their son. So I'm going to ask one more time, will the Minister please look at this matter again and exercise his responsibility and exercise his authority to determine if the school board is acting in the best interest of this child?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And we work very hard to ensure that the school boards and the department are doing what they need to do to look after the interests of those who are in their charge with respect to education. And always, Mr. Speaker, there are challenges with respect to meeting those responsibilities. and we will continue to work toward meeting those challenges. And I can appreciate that it is an ongoing responsibility, and it's one which we will continue to work at.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Minister of Health. About 2 weeks ago, a general surgeon left Soldiers Memorial Hospital to fill a position at the Valley Regional Hospital. And while the residents of Middleton are happy that the minister didn't drive the surgeon out of the province, they still are concerned about the fate of their hospital in Middleton. And my question to the minister, can the minister please indicate whether her department is making it their priority to replace the general surgeon at Soldiers Memorial Hospital?
The honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it's a priority of the department to recruit medical personnel to all areas of the province that need it. And certainly the issue in Middleton is one of the priorities of our department. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your first supplementary.
Thank you, and I'll thank the minister for her commitment on that. But I do note to the minister that her department website is not showing a vacancy for a general surgeon at Soldiers Memorial Hospital. And if you want to know why residents are concerned about the fate of their hospital, this could be one of the reasons, perhaps. The people of Middleton, Mr. Speaker, truly feel that recruiting a general surgeon for Soldiers Memorial Hospital is not a priority of this government. So will the minister commit here today that she will go back to her department and demand, or at least nicely ask, that recruitment efforts concentrate on finding a full-time general surgeon for Soldiers Memorial Hospital?
The honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, certainly our MLA for the area has made the concerns very clear from his point of view. And that being said, there are plans for Soldiers Memorial and how it fits in to the DHA in the Valley that we are working on with the DHA. There are a number of issues in the Valley, Mr. Speaker, and one of the reasons for our announcement there the other day was to develop a better plan for facilities in the Valley and for the personnel needed in all areas of that DHA. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, whether it's the backlogs for surgery that's been created inside of this hospital or the lack of support in finding replacement for the surgeon, one thing the residents of Middleton and that surrounding area believe is that the minister just doesn't care about them. They're really concerned about that hospital being downsized eventually to a healthcare center. So on behalf, half of the hospital beds in that hospital, Mr. Speaker, are occupied by those who are waiting for long-term care beds. So one would wonder, and I would wonder to question whether the future for that hospital holds as well, what that future holds. My question to the minister, Mr. Speaker, will the minister promise today that in light of all of these issues I brought before the House, that she will commit to the District Health Authority on a regular basis the status in finding a full-time general surgeon who will base his or her practice, full-time practice, at the Soldiers Memorial Hospital? Will she commit to that here today?
The honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I believe I'd already done that. But I would like to add that there is orthopedic surgery taking place at day surgery at Soldiers now, and the DHA does have a plan to increase day surgery, beginning with gynecology and neurology. And Mr. Speaker, the DHA knows very well that that is one of the ways in which to make very good use of Soldiers Memorial is with the increased number of day surgeries that are now being done both there and everywhere else in the province, Mr. Speaker. That is one of the ways to avoid people having to come to Halifax for specialist surgery. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Transportation and Public Works. Recently, along with Randy Carter, a candidate in the next election, I attended a meeting in Chesapeake, located in the Eastern Shore. This was a public meeting regarding the replacement of a vital transportation link, the Canterbury Bridge, which has been closed since early October 2002. And I will table 2 press releases the former minister put out in regard to this. 2 government MLAs were in attendance at this meeting, Mr. Speaker, and the local member did attempt to provide details of what he knew about the project. Local residents have indicated to me through phone calls and emails that medical emergencies have already been affected by this road closure. My question to the minister: could the minister please provide details as to the replacement of the Canterbury Bridge?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the honourable member asked a very, very good question. Mr. Speaker, this is a very, very, very important issue, and one that has been vitally important to the people of the area concerned. And the honourable member for the Eastern Shore and the honourable member for Preston have been first and foremost, Mr. Speaker, in making sure that this issue was brought forward for effective handling. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to tell the honourable member that, in point of fact, a tender has been called for the complete replacement of the Canterbury Bridge in question, which is closing with a completion date hoped for of May the 30th, 2003.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton and the Lakes on your first supplementary. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton and the Lakes has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, this is not uncommon news from the Minister of Transportation. Not this particular minister, but the previous minister made at least 2 prior commitments for this project. Now, what I want to ask the minister on behalf of the people, and I do accept his word, I'm not denying, that's acceptable. But what I want the minister to do is please indicate for the people in that area that he makes the commitment that that file will have his attention until that infrastructure is replaced. Thank you.
Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And for the benefit of the honourable member, the tender number is 60114379. And Mr. Speaker, it has had the full attention of this minister and the previous minister, I might add. And the difficulty has been in dealing with the federal government, the federal Liberal government, and in particular the Navigable Waters Protection Area. And it was their difficulties with them that were holding the project up.
Honourable Member for Cape Breton and the Lakes on your final supplementary.
I want to thank the minister for the reply. Mr. Speaker, roads are a mess in rural Cape Breton, particularly in Cape Breton and the Lakes. Streets are crumbling. Local DOT people are doing the best that they can be done with the resources at hand. This minister does have options. He has signed a new agreement now with the federal government, there are issues in Cape Breton, such as the access roads to and from the Cabot Trail, which could be classified as 100 series highways. This would allow the minister to free up more money for rural areas like Cape Breton and the Lakes. Will the minister consider my suggestion?
Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much. I would agree with the honourable member that the federal government's contribution towards 100 series highways in this province has been inadequate, and that obviously any contribution from the federal government, the greater the contribution, the better off we are. I can also tell the honourable member that with respect to Cape Breton and the Lakes, Mr. Speaker, I'm aware of the importance of the roads in that riding, and that our department and the government will be looking at those road priorities as important issues in the future.
The
The honourable member for Halifax-Shabakdale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today, the Electricity Marketplace Governance Committee released its second interim report. This is the government's committee that's promoting deregulation and competition. It proposes that a large swathe of our market be opened up to competition. But what I want to know is what the minister is going to do to protect the rest of us who are captive of Nova Scotia Power as their customers.
Order, please. Time allotted for question period has expired. The honourable member for Cape Breton South on opposition
yes,
government.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, during question period, I asked a question to the Premier, which was subsequently lateraled off to the Minister responsible for Service Nova Scotia, who I see is just exiting the chamber.
Order, please. Order.
Mr. Speaker, during that exchange, a question period, the Minister told Nova Scotians and the members of this House that a deal had been done with the SOE partners and the government of Nova Scotia regarding negotiations for property taxes. He said the deal was done, Mr. Speaker. Today, I find out that the deal is not done, that the industry people tell me that there is no such a deal, and that, Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Service Nova Scotia should either tell Nova Scotians that the deal is not done, or if he feels it is done, to table this deal in the House before the close of business tomorrow. I would ask the Minister to do that.
Thank you. I'm sure that the order, please. Order, please. You want to respond? Now, Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member raised the question about his question regarding the agreement on the assessment. He clearly said that the counties of Guysborough and Antigonish didn't know, which meant he was referring to the Maritime and Northeast Pipeline. Yeah. My answer was regarding the Maritime and Northeast Pipeline, and those issues have been resolved. That's what I responded to him.
Our member Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, that was not the question, and I never mentioned Antigonish in my question during question period. I mentioned Guysborough and Richmond on an issue of property taxes, and that minister stood in his place and said the deal was done, and the people in the industry are saying no such a deal is done. If the deal is done, I would ask the member or the minister to table the deal.
Order, please. The member Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and possibly you could review answer to see exactly what the question was and whether the answer
we will.
lay to it.
Obviously, it's not a point of order. It's a disagreement of the facts between two members and a disagreement between two members. And if the honourable minister wants to clarify at a later date, he's welcome to. The honourable member Sackville-Cobequid on opposition.
Thank you. Just trying to be helpful, Mr. Speaker. I've already passed.
It's on the same issue?
The business.
Behind.
Oh.
Down member Cape Breton West on the point of order.
I'm not sure if you would classify it as a point of personal privilege or I think more of a point of order. Last week and again today, the Minister of Economic Development indicated that he would provide a list of the businesses that applied for loan applications through Nova Scotia Business Inc. At that time, I was given assurance I would have that information within 48 hours. And that's approaching close to a week now. And I would ask if that information would be forthcoming within the next 24 hours.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, with regards to a 48-hour timeline, that I'm not certain of, but I am certain that I did commit to do that, and I will present that information.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Queens on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to bring your attention to Mr. Chris McNeil and Mr. Gary Levy, who are in the gallery opposite, just riveted to the debate that's taking place down here today, and ask them to stand and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Thank you. The Honourable Member Sackville-Cobequid.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess the members won't get out early because I had left 4 minutes at the end free. So since we're starting just about 4 minutes late, maybe we can just adjust the times down. People will still have as much time to speak, Mr. Speaker. So would you please call resolution number 289 and as say the end and start times just be 4 minutes later.
Resolution 289. The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to have a few minutes to speak on Resolution 289, Mr. Speaker, which this is the second time we're debating this resolution, for the record. The first time, Mr. Speaker, we debated it 2 weeks ago, and we decided to call it back because it is such an important resolution. It deals with specifically the resolution was moved shortly after New Brunswick announced its position on how they would address skyrocketing auto insurance rates in that province. And it's important, I think, Mr. Speaker, to reflect on the fact that New Brunswick currently, or at least until new legislation is passed there, has a very similar position to Nova Scotia, which is very laissez-faire. Nothing is done about auto insurance rates. Auto insurance companies are able to come in, raise rates basically at will. There's no regulatory approval process. There's no means by which the government can actually try and slow or stop or cap auto insurance rates. And of course, that means that the insurance companies are free to do as they will. What's important, I think, Mr. Speaker, with regard to auto insurance, which makes it different than other forms of insurance or other products, consumer products, is that it is essential, Mr. Speaker. With the very minor exception of those who can afford to put $1 million bond in place in order to avoid auto insurance, the rest of us have to actually buy auto insurance in order to operate a vehicle in this province, Mr. Speaker. That is a very serious situation, and one in which, obviously, it makes auto insurance and the companies that sell it to individuals in this province makes it an essential service. In some ways, you can compare it to healthcare, or you can compare it to education. It's a service that's provided, but in this case, it's provided by private sector, Mr. Speaker, and yet we have no control over the rates. And in fact, I guess also is to compare it to Nova Scotia Power and electricity, an essential service that's provided. Same with telephone service, Mr. Speaker, but these services are actually regulated, and there's some approval process before they can increase rates. And as a result, there is some control by government bodies, by independent bodies, to make sure that there is no gouging going on, Mr. Speaker. And I think that's what's important with regard to auto insurance. But the New Brunswick solution, Mr. Speaker, as noted in the Resolution 289 originally, stated, Mr. Speaker, that they're not going to cap rates. They're not going to do anything to reduce rates. They're going to cap injury limits, or the amount of damage you can get for injuries, up to a certain amount. Basically, it's what they call a partial no-fault system. Basically, it is for whiplash, soft tissue injuries, low-level injuries that involve damages usually under $20,000, $25,000, Mr. Speaker. Those type of injuries will be capped at a certain level, and there will be a bureaucracy that will come into place either through the insurance company or otherwise that will result in those damages being applied. Much like the workers' comp system is, to put it into perspective for some people, where instead of going to court in order to have a judge or a jury make a decision, there'll be some bureaucrat in an office, whether that bureaucrat be private sector or public sector, who'll be making decisions as to when or what damages will be provided, Mr. Speaker. So it puts a cap in New Brunswick on the amount of damages someone can get for an injury, puts them into a bureaucracy not unlike the workers' comp system, but does nothing to stop insurance companies from continuing to raise rates. And I assume the insurance companies are hoping that this will, at least in the short term, quiet this groundswell of anger amongst consumers in Atlantic Canada against auto insurance hikes, in hopes that any debate that might go on about serious structural change that will ensure we can actually reduce auto insurance rates, Mr. Speaker, goes away for a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years until someone else and some other problem happens and they've decided to jack rates up again. Well, Mr. Speaker, this is the problem in Nova Scotia. In Nova Scotia, rates have gone up 65% in the last year. That is a massive increase, Mr. Speaker, by any amount. Inflation hasn't been that high. I suspect there's those that will tell you, Mr. Speaker, that damages have not been that high. Yet the rates have gone up to that extent. Some argue it's because there are things that are happening in the equity market and with regard to how investment of the money that we pay in premiums into the equity markets, the stock markets, has resulted in losses. I don't know if that's true, Mr. Speaker, but the fact is that these are all questions that are out there and they were never clearly resolved. Now, I want to go back a bit to last year, Mr. Speaker. January of last year, we were all getting calls as members of the legislature, I'm sure, of our constituents who were complaining about auto insurance rates. A lot of seniors, particularly, who had perfect driving records, were told that their rates were going to double or triple or quadruple, Mr. Speaker, and yet there was nothing they could do about it. Well, it's interesting enough because it's an interesting little story I think we should put on the record, because I got a call one day in my constituency office in January of 2002, Mr. Speaker, and at that time I was told that by a fellow who was a constituent of mine that he had called the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and the Insurance Bureau of Canada said, you should call your MLA because there's something in the legislation that allows this to be reviewed. And I thought to myself, I'm not sure about that. So I ended up, based on this call that the guy was referred from the IBC, Mr. Speaker, I ended up looking into this a little further and found that under the Insurance Act, there it was. Utility and Review Board had the power to review insurance rates if they were required by the government or on their own initiative. And at that point, that is where our caucus said, this is what we must do. As a minimum, we must go out. And I want to thank the Insurance Bureau of Canada for actually sending this constituent to us and letting me know and letting our caucus know that this is one option. It's only the first option. We're still waiting to hear back from the UARB as to what they think is the issue around your insurance rates. We're hoping that they will recognize what everyone else has recognized in this province, both anecdotally and to some extent through research, that insurance rates are going through the roof, that there is no basis for those increases, and that there's a need for them to be rolled back. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's only the beginning, because what has happened since then is much bigger. There's been clearly a lot more debate about exactly how we can not only cap insurance rates, but begin to reduce insurance rates. New Brunswick had their chance. They went with an all-party committee, which I believe the Liberal caucus had suggested as their solution. And in the end, that all-party committee never made recommendations to reduce rates, Mr. Speaker, in New Brunswick. All they said was, we are going to not even cap rates, we're going to cap injury damages through injuries, Mr. Speaker. And the problem is, Mr. Speaker, that, and you see it now, but many more people are beginning to call, and they continue to call with regard to their insurance rates. Seniors, I had a couple in my office the other day. They live in the Eastern Shore. They came and talked to me, Mr. Speaker, and they said, you know, we had a minor accident, you know, not even very large damages. And they said, Mr. Speaker, that they didn't understand why they had to go to facility association because of it. And in the end, they were treated quite badly by their insurance company, Mr. Speaker, and they were actually thrown out of the insurance. And their concern was their rates were astronomically high, and now under facility it's even much higher, and now they've just gotten approval under facility association to increase rates even more, Mr. Speaker. That's my understanding. And based on all this, clearly, this is a young couple who has a pretty good driving record, a couple of minor accidents, and because of that, Mr. Speaker, their rates go through the roof to the point where they may not even be able to afford their vehicle. This is a young family living in Lawrencetown. Obviously, they need a vehicle. There's no public transportation down that way, Mr. Speaker. And these are the problems faced, either they be seniors or young couples. These are people, Mr. Speaker, that need their vehicles. They live in rural parts of Nova Scotia. They require vehicles. It's not something that they can do without. Given the lack of public transportation in these areas, it's a necessity. Insurance is a necessity, car is a necessity, therefore this is an essential service, and yet this government has done nothing, Mr. Speaker, has done nothing. It has no plan, Mr. Speaker, with regard to how it's going to not only cap insurance rates, but reduce them. And I think that's what our party wants to make clear about this debate, Mr. Speaker. This isn't just about capping, skyrocketing insurance rates. We can actually reduce them. Nova Scotians may not know that, but over the coming months, we are going to continue to have this debate. We're going to continue to talk to Nova Scotians about how rates can be reduced, how we can begin to identify how Nova Scotia can have an insurance system that works for Nova Scotian drivers. Now, the party across the way, the government doesn't want to talk about that. They've created a pretty brochure online that you can download. And by the way, I might say for the record, I don't think you can actually fill out the form online. I went online and I couldn't do it. You actually have to download it, I think, fill it in and send it in. Would have been nice anyway if they could have had some way of filing it online. It would have been easier to try and encourage responses. But anyway, that's beside the point. Mr. Speaker, it's a questionnaire that identifies certain components of what this government may want to talk about. But again, there's no plan. There's no clear way in which this government intends to actually not only cap but reduce insurance rates. It can be done. I think our party looks forward to debating the issue, Mr. Speaker, because it's one of those issues that Nova Scotians, it hits them in the pocketbook. And one thing we've learned, Mr. Speaker, in our time in this legislature is that Nova Scotian families are looking for a real break, a break on those essentials in life, whether it be electricity costs or home heating oil or auto insurance. They can get that break. They can get that opportunity to deal with these things. New Brunswick had their chance, Mr. Speaker. They didn't do it. Other provinces have moved to other systems. Ontario, Alberta, Newfoundland, I believe, all have a system in which the insurance companies don't have the right to automatically increase rates, but have to ask for permission from a tribunal or a government body. That can work to some extent. Some provinces have moved to driver-owned auto insurance, where the public owns the system. It's a good system, one in which there are no tax dollars involved, Mr. Speaker, one in which the system has resulted in reduction in auto insurance rates in those provinces. Well, Mr. Speaker, these are options, ones that we've been talking about through our task force to find out what Nova Scotians really want and why they can reduce insurance rates, Mr. Speaker. I don't see that coming from the government side. What they've had is basically a patchwork or an opportunity to show they're doing something in hopes that people will think that they're actually doing something when in fact all they're doing is waiting until after the election in hopes that they win, and therefore they can ignore the issue. Well, this issue isn't going away. It doesn't matter who wins the next election, Mr. Speaker. We're all going to have to deal with it. We're all going to have to face what exactly it's going to mean for Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. That's what it's going to take for Nova Scotians to understand, and I'm hoping through the election they'll have a debate as to exactly what options there are for insurance. It isn't just about capping damages through a no-fault system or a no-fault system, Mr. Speaker. It is about ensuring that Nova Scotians get a break on what is an essential service, auto insurance. The rates can be reduced. The cost of living in this province, one of the biggest costs is auto insurance, and ensuring that that can go down, actually be reduced, so Nova Scotians have an opportunity to put that money towards other things that ensure that their life can be better, their children and their grandchildren's lives can be better. Well, Mr. Speaker, that won't happen until auto insurance is addressed and this province begins to talk about how we stop skyrocketing auto insurance rates, Mr. Speaker. It can happen. Nova Scotians want it to happen. Other provinces have found ways to deal with it, either through a regulatory approval process or through driver-owned auto insurance, yet this province has one of the most limited, most laissez-faire systems of actually regulating auto insurance in this country, Mr. Speaker, and as a result, Nova Scotian drivers are worse for it. And this government was trying to ignore this issue. They were forced from the beginning in 2002 to require the UARB to review this. They didn't want to. It was only political pressure from our caucus and from average Nova Scotians who demanded that this government do something. That was a stopgap measure. UARB had their hearings. We haven't got a decision back, but clearly Nova Scotians are still angry about this. They want to see something done about auto insurance. The government tried again this year to have a consultation plan to try and talk to Nova Scotians in hopes of producing a report someday, hopefully after the election. Well, Mr. Speaker, none of that's happened. None of it will happen, Mr. Speaker, because this government has no real plan with regard to dealing with auto insurance rates. I'm looking forward to the debate in the next couple of months, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that Nova Scotians have a real option with regard to reducing auto insurance rates. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester, Muscatava Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to rise on this particular topic today. I would like to say, in fact, Mr. Speaker, that the Standing Committee on Economic Development, the Nova Scotia Standing Committee on Economic Development, had an opportunity to bring in a representative, Mr. Don Forgeron, to our committee, and I know some committee members are in attendance here today. And for the record, I'd like to say that this government understands that rising insurance and rising auto insurance rates have had an impact on Nova Scotians, whether it's students, seniors, working families, and business people. And I find it hard to agree with the NDP when they like to boast about it was because of their pressure that this government referred the issue to the UARB. Well, the fact of the matter is, but the record will clearly show, Mr. Speaker, for the honourable member for Dartmouth North, if he would take the time to listen, the record will clearly show that long before the NDP became actively involved in this issue, members of the Standing Committee on Economic Development requested that the department, that Standing Committee, well, all you got to go is go back and look at the history of the issue.
Please. Order, please. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre on the point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is. And I would ask that member to look at who brought that to the attention. It wasn't this government, it was this member. Thank you.
Another point of order, disagreement of the facts. The honourable member for Colchester, Muscatava Valley.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, I begin with this government understands that rising auto insurance rates have had an impact on Nova Scotia, and And, you know, I don't want to get into he said, she said, and somebody trying to take credit, but the NDP were on their feet first, trying to take credit that they were the ones when the record will clearly show, if the honourable member for Cape Breton Centre would go back and look, and he's a member of that committee, it was not the NDP caucus that requested me as chair to ask Mr. Forgeron to come in. It was members of the PC caucus. So let the record clearly show that this government was clearly aware of it and very concerned. Now, having said that, I do commend the NDP caucus for jumping on the bandwagon as belatedly as it was. It was very nice that they saw that this was an issue and a concern. And I'd like to speak to some of the initiatives, some of the positive initiatives that this government has taken to address the concern of rising auto insurance rates, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, this government took a very, very important step, and I commend the former minister responsible, the Honourable Dave Morse, for referring the issue to the Utility and Review Board. Mr. Speaker, in February of 2002, the department asked the UARB to examine private passenger automobile insurance rates to determine if those rates are excessive, inadequate, unfairly discriminatory, or otherwise unreasonable. The hearing concluded in November, and the report is expected soon, very soon. Mr. Speaker, that was an important step that this government took. Now, some other steps that this government has taken, and I should mention, perhaps before I move on, as the member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage already suggested, the Insurance Act provides the government with the ability, by way of a provision in the very act, that you can make that request. Well, this government did that. This government did that, and it was supported by, I believe, all members in the Nova Scotia legislature. Now, well, maybe not all members, but I know that all members in the PC caucus certainly supported it. Now, on January the 10th, 2003, you might call it step 2, this government released a consumer's guide to buying auto insurance. And Mr. Speaker, we can't use props, but I know, Mr. Speaker, you probably have a copy of Consumer's Guide to Buying Insurance. Now, the brochure was designed to help lessen the confusion and perhaps cut out some of the misconceptions, if you will, about buying auto insurance. I think the idea was great, and I commend the minister and those responsible for producing and developing the brochure, and explains things drivers should know before purchasing auto insurance. And it explains in very detailed form some of the questions that individuals should ask their insurance representatives and insurance companies. You know, there's a number of different things you have to take into account when you are buying auto insurance. In some cases, people find the terms and information quite overwhelming and very confusing. So I think that the brochure goes a long way to clarifying some issues that insurance buyers may have. And feedback about the document, A Consumer's Guide to Buying Auto Insurance, has been positive. And more than some 2,500 copies have been accessed through our website alone. Now, step 3, if you will, Mr. Speaker. Step 3 refers to public consultation relative to auto insurance rates. And a road ahead, again, another document. It's a planned approach to auto insurance solutions. And I'm very proud that this government, the John Ham government, was able to come up with a way that's quite effective, again, in identifying possible solutions to the concerns that Nova Scotians have when they're out there trying to purchase auto insurance. And more than 1,500 copies of this document have been accessed through our website. And again, I think it was a positive step and more than appropriate in recognition of the concern that people have regarding the auto insurance system. Now, just last April 11th, this government announced another significant step in addition to the public consultation process. And this government named a consumer advocate. and the appointment was to Mr. George Jordan, and I think it's only fair that I would, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, offer up the toll-free consumer advocate number for Nova Scotians. The local number is 424-2794, and the toll-free number is 1-800-898-7668. And this government encourages, one more time, well, it's 1-800-898-7668. And this government encourages Nova Scotians. Well, Mr. Speaker, some of my colleagues are asking me what the local number is, and the exchange is quite common to most people. It's 424-2794. So, Mr. Speaker, I have confidence in the consumer advocate. He's quite renowned and very much respected by Nova Scotians, and he's well recognized from one end of this province to the other. And, you know, Mr. Jordan, a public broadcaster, will do. I can state with all confidence he will do a great job on behalf of Nova Scotians. And that's what we're talking about. This isn't trying to take credit, the NDP, the Liberals, the PCs. This is about an individual that's recognized by all. I don't even know his politics, but this man is recognized by all Nova Scotians as being respected, as being responsible, and somebody that will try to work on behalf of Nova Scotians. And Mr. Jordan, yes, is going to come back with recommendations. He's been mandated to come back with recommendations, and along with the other steps, those other very positive steps that this government has taken, I believe and trust that we will see some recommendations that can possibly, no, I would say probably, lead to lower insurance rates. That's the objective of this government. And, Mr. Speaker, all those three steps do have teeth. All those three steps, Mr. Speaker, should result in probably lower insurance rates, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm very, very pleased that we have taken those steps, and we all have concerns about high auto insurance rates. But when you try to it's a complex issue. It's not just as easy as saying simply lower the rates, Mr. Speaker. You know, there is also a very interesting article, and I can table this, Mr. Speaker, in today's Chronicle Herald. It's entitled, Raise the Deductible and Save Hundreds on Car Insurance by Ellen Roseman. Oh, yes, that is, it does reference Ontario, but I think a lot of members in the House know, but perhaps senior citizens, people of all ages, those with, you know, family members that have one or two people driving, can ascertain easily from this article that if one is to raise your premium, for example, you can lower your rates. You can lower your... Well, Mr. Speaker, for example, liability coverage. You know, a lot of people are driving around with $35,000 liability. Some people have $200,000, Mr. Speaker. And yes, that's the point. That's the point. They have an insurance card. Now, I can't say how many, mind you, but people are hard pressed. And when you talk to RCMP officers and police services, they will tell you very quickly that, well, Murray, the Honourable Speaker, being a former police officer, knows some of the scams that people involve themselves in sometimes to obtain an insurance card. And I'll leave it at that. But you know, people are quite creative when they make insurance arrangements. But this government has taken steps, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, how much time would I have left? 2 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to... Mr. Speaker, the toll-free number is 1-800-898 to get a hold of Mr. Jordan, 7668. But, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to reference something. I know you was in the chair yesterday, and I think it only appropriate to get it on public record. And this is shifting gears, but I inadvertently but inappropriately referred to one particular caucus in this House as being scoundrels, and I'd like to withdraw that terminology and name with an apology. I will say, in as much as that statement and name at the time did seem well placed. I will certainly comply, Mr. Speaker, with your request, and perhaps I should have referred to them or could have referred to them as being rascals, but every member in this House is an honorable individual, and you make a big major commitment to come in there. And having said that, all honorable members in this House are very concerned about the insurance rates that Nova Scotians are paying. And listen, I sometimes get a little bit annoyed when you hear folks refer to seniors as somehow to classify people that are out there buying insurance. That's not fair. That's not fair, because some of the best drivers that I know and some of the best drivers in Nova Scotia are our senior citizens, Mr. Speaker. So let's not discriminate and classify people. Let's look at their individual driving records, irrespective if you're 16 or 106. It shouldn't be done, and this government won't do that. We're not into that at all. But we're trying to help, if we can, Mr. Speaker, people receive fair auto insurance coverage.
Thank you.
Thank
I'd
you.
like to thank the honourable member for retracting that statement they made yesterday and apologizing to the House. Let's accept it. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, usually every day we get our staff to give us the newspaper clippings of some of the highlights of the daily newspapers, and one of the articles in today's Chronicle Herald was an article entitled "Hot Air Promises," and I think that's pretty well summarizes what we heard from the member for Colchester Musquodoboit, so I will put that in file 13 where it should be. Mr. Speaker, let's go to the heart of the issue. There are a number of issues here that are of significant importance. One has to remember the history of this entire issue on insurance as it relates to government policy and taxation. It was a Conservative government in 1967 that introduced a 2% hidden tax on all insurance premiums, whether it be home insurance, auto insurance, life insurance, or whatever. Mr. Speaker, it was a Conservative government that introduced that tax. And again, Mr. Speaker, in 1989, Mr. Speaker, it was again a Conservative government that increased that tax, that hidden tax. It was the then Minister of Consumer Affairs, the Honourable Colin Stewart, who increased that insurance premium tax. So, Mr. Speaker, that kind of sets the groundwork for perhaps, yes, the Honourable Colin Stewart, who was the minister. Mr. Speaker, the government this year will collect $48.5 million in hidden insurance premiums, tax on the insurance premiums for the people of Nova Scotia this year. That's a significant increase, Mr. Speaker, over the previous year. I believe, and I do stand to be corrected, but I believe on a previous day, last year, the minister indicated approximately $30 million, between $30 and $35 million of taxes would be collected on insurance premiums in Nova Scotia. So the government has a lot to benefit by doing nothing on this issue. They will collect anywhere from $13 to $15 million more in hidden taxes than they did the previous year. Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, that would explain the foot dragging. Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, that would explain why they didn't want to go with an all-party committee last year. Mr. Speaker, the government goes with great fanfare of indicating that it's appointed a consumer advocate. But in the same press release, Mr. Speaker, the government indicates that the consumer advocate is not allowed to disclose any information unless it's approved by the government. In the same press release. So here we have a consumer advocate fighting for the people of Nova Scotia who's not allowed to stand up for those people unless the government approves what he has to say. Well, Mr. Speaker, the member for Colchester Musquodoboit, who makes an eloquent chihuahua in doing the bidding for government policy, And that's all he does. He gets up and clatter chaps. He clatter chaps about a lot of things that the government's going to do, but they don't do anything. They're gouging the consumers of Nova Scotia an extra $15 million. An extra $15 million over what they gouged out of them last year. And what does that member do? He stands up and he apologizes. He apologizes for the government.
Order, please. Member Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley, on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I have no difficulty with the honourable member referring to me as a Chihuahua. What I do have different, a Chihuahua. But what I do have some difficulty with is the honourable member standing in his place and perhaps speaking. I don't know if he's speaking on behalf of the Liberal caucus or not, like he was in the P3 schools. But does the Liberal caucus believe that Mr. Jordan should release private public information? Make private information public, I'm sorry? This is what he's saying? Private information when people confide in him? No, he should clarify himself, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. With all the noise in the chamber, I didn't hear the honourable member of Cape Breton West what he called the honourable member for Colchester Musquodoboit Valley, but I'm sure that if it was what he said, he would wish to retract that.
At the seams.
The honourable member Cape Breton West.
Mr. Speaker, if it wouldn't be anything less than an honourable Chihuahua.
Order, please.
I think, you know,
I think the honourable member wanted to retract that.
Well, yes, Mr.
Sure, he would.
Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member Cape Breton West has the floor.
Aside from the jest, Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is the member stood in his place today, as he usually does, and tries to be the apologist for the government as to why it's doing nothing for the seniors of Nova Scotia. While Mr. Speaker, insurance companies are demanding confidential information, medical information. They are gouging the seniors. They are gouging the consumers of Nova Scotia with, in some cases, excessive insurance premiums. Mr. Speaker, that's what's so disappointing, Mr. Speaker. So the government is looking and hoping for an opportunity for this House to recess and get through an election so they won't have to deal with this issue. And that's why they appointed this consumer advocate, Mr. Speaker, who the honourable member for Colchester Musquodoboit Valley knows, and every member in this House should know, and I believe they do. Confidential and private information, personal information, he knows that's not to be disclosed. That's not what I was talking about. But as usual, he tries with his silly little rabbit tracks. And Mr. Speaker, we're not going to be taken in by that, Mr. Speaker. If he wants to apologize for why the government is doing nothing, let him do it. Let him say that to the people of Nova Scotia. What about the emails that all members of this House, I'm sure, have been receiving about constituents of his complaining about high insurance premiums? What has he done? He has done nothing. He has not done nothing to represent their interest. What official representation has he made to the minister? What official representation?
The honourable member Colchester Musquodoboit Valley, the point of order.
Yes, on the point of order, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member now has breached every parliamentary code in this legislature of all the members to stand in the House and accuse another honourable member of doing nothing, Mr. Speaker. I find it reprehensible, Mr. Speaker. This government has frozen the premiums in pharmacare for seniors. This government has lowered the fishing license fee for seniors. This government has frozen co-pays for seniors. Mr. Speaker, we've done a lot for seniors, and we're going to continue doing a lot for seniors.
Order, please. It's not a point of order. The honourable member Cape Breton West has the floor.
Well, like I said, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is an apologist for the provincial government. Why else would they continue to gouge the consumers with hidden taxes on insurance premiums in this province? Why would they say nothing while they're collecting an extra $13 to $15 million a year? Yes, Mr. Speaker, that's why the honourable member is not advocating like he usually did when he was on this side of the floor, because he has to be quiet. Because the government has the Rumsfeld plan. It has the Rumsfeld plan. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to go there. Because there are issues like soft tissue. Mr. Speaker, there's considerable consternation about the fact that insurance companies are saying the reason why premiums are going up is because of soft tissue claims. Now, let's assume for the sake of discussion that's correct. Let's look at the payouts at the end of the fiscal year or the time period for which a particular claim is booked on the books. I would submit, Mr. Speaker, and I don't have actual numbers to back this up, but I would submit that there's a considerable amount of money, I would say in the millions, if not tens of millions of dollars, every year in Nova Scotia set aside in contingency plans so that it's booked as a liability for the insurance company and it's never paid out. That's right, it's called reserves, Mr. Speaker. And is that what they're basing on the increased premiums? I recall at one time, if a consumer had a small fender bender, let's say it was $300 or $500 or whatever, and they decided between the driver and the other driver, who may have had no damage at all to his or her vehicle, say, okay, well, I'll pay that for myself. I'm not going to bother putting it through the insurance. That was never ever considered as a claim by the insurance company against you in rating your insurance. Now, Mr. Speaker, whether you put that claim in or not, the insurance company marks you as a liability. Now, I'm not so sure that's so fair. I'm not even sure if it's legal, Mr. Speaker. It must be, because the government is seeing it happen and they're doing nothing about it. And I know they wouldn't just quietly sit around and do nothing to break the law or allow the law to be broken. These are the types of issues, you know, the extreme pressures that are put on seniors. And heaven forbid, when somebody has an automobile, if they keep it for more than 10 years or 12 years, all of a sudden they're paying a higher premium because the insurance company says it's an old vehicle and it's going to cost more to repair, or it's so depreciated that it's a liability for a newer, more expensive vehicle on the highway. I don't know what the logic is, but how is it that a vehicle can be older and depreciate in value and you have to pay higher insurance, whether you have an accident or not? There's something dysfunctional about that whole process, Mr. Speaker, and the government is sitting around doing nothing about it. You don't have to appoint a consumer's advocate, you know, to set up a hotline, whether it's called 1-800-BROOK or whoever you want to call. You don't have to have that to know what the problems are out there. We know what the problems are. You know, why isn't the government deferring some of that windfall from the hidden tax back to the consumers, back to the seniors, back to the disabled, back to those consumers who are disadvantaged because of this unconscionable increase in premiums? Now, Mr. Speaker, in fairness to some of the insurance companies, they have been hit with considerable increased cost. I mean, we have to look at both sides of the equation. But why? Why, Mr. Speaker? Is it because the stock markets haven't been good to them and they've been taking premiums, money, and investing it in the market? Does it have anything to do with the Twin Towers in New York coming down? The federal government down there in the States moved to limit liability claims against insurance companies. Why isn't the government standing up for the consumers here in Canada and in Nova Scotia? Mr. Speaker, I guess my time is coming close to an end, but I think the point is made. Thank you.
Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It certainly is a pleasure to rise today to speak on this resolution. I want to start out by responding to a few things that were said already in debate. And the first thing is an observation that was made by the honourable member from Cape Breton West, and he talked in roundabout terms about the auto insurance system as a whole. And he never really came out and said this, but I think the point that he was trying to make was that the auto insurance system in this province is broken. And Mr. Speaker, it's broken because, as it stands today, it is unable to respond to the needs of the consumers. It cannot provide the insurance product that is required at a reasonable price. That is a system, Mr. Speaker, that is broken. So I think that was the point that the member from Cape Breton West was trying to make, and I agree with him. The other point I wanted to pick up on was a commentary that was made by my friend from the beautiful Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley, and he talked about some of the safest and some of the best drivers that we have are a product of their life experience are our seniors, Mr. Speaker, and I want to tell the member opposite that I absolutely agree with that, and I think that it is a terrible thing that the rating policy of many insurers in this province is to decide that at a certain age, your age becomes the reason for which you must pay higher auto insurance premiums. I think this is discriminatory. I think it is unfair. And I think that the excuses that are made by the industry for this policy simply don't hold water. So on those two points, I wanted to agree with both of my colleagues. Now, Mr. Speaker, the first thing you have to know about auto insurance in this province is that the cost of auto insurance has gone up by over 65% in a one-year period. And how you go about measuring that is that you look at a policy period from, say you renewed in January of 2002, you would then have to renew again in January 2003. Well, what you're going to look at is what the increase in the cost of your policy was one renewal over another. Those people who renewed in January of this year found that their rates were, on average, 65% higher than when they renewed a year before. By any measure, Mr. Speaker, that is a significant increase in the cost of auto insurance premiums in the province. Now, what's interesting, of course, and this was noted by others here today, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, which is, and people should understand that the Insurance Bureau of Canada is not any kind of an independent organization designed to provide insurance information to people across the province. The Insurance Bureau of Canada is an industry lobby group. They are paid for by the insurance industry, and they represent the views of the insurance industry. What the Insurance Bureau of Canada has said is that it's the claims process, the fact that there are, they say, more auto claims and higher payouts from those claims that are causing the auto insurance premium to skyrocket. Well, Mr. Speaker, this is interesting, and you may know that I introduced in this House, and in fact you sent off to the Insurance Bureau of Canada a letter with regard to this. The reality is that the Canadian Institute for Health Information has pointed out that accident rates in Nova Scotia are in fact decreasing, and we have the second lowest rate of hospitalization in Canada related to motor vehicle accidents. So, Mr. Speaker, where are the increased claims coming from? Where are the increased payouts coming from? These are inconsistent with the information that the Insurance Bureau of Canada is putting forward. Over and above that, the Canadian Bar Association, the Nova Scotia section, did a review of claims in this province. The conclusion that they came forward with was that there was only a very small increase in the awards that were made in the Nova Scotia courts with respect to soft tissue injuries. And Mr. Speaker, anyone who has worked in that system would not be surprised by that, because Nova Scotia courts are in fact notorious for having the lowest awards for soft tissue injuries anywhere in the country. So unless the IBC is prepared to come forward with some concrete evidence of this increase in the cost of claim settlement, Mr. Speaker, it's very difficult to understand on what basis they make that claim. What we do know from all of the industry materials is that over the last year, and we know this because the government is suffering the same thing, and apparently the trust funds of the Liberal Party are all suffering from a decline in the value of their invested premiums. In the case of the Liberal Party, invested income that they had received from sources unknown. But in any event, because of downturns in the stock market, they have suffered significant losses. And this is primarily, and that means that the dividends that they are able to pay their shareholders have declined. This is, of course, a significant concern to big insurance companies. They're in the business of generating income for their shareholders. If they are unable to do that, then they have to find ways to do it. And, Mr. Speaker, really there are only two ways to do it. One way is to increase their premium revenue, the amount that they charge you and me and everyone else out there who drives an automobile. The other way they can do it is they can cap the benefits that they give, either the accident benefits themselves directly or the amount that they pay out in claims for non-economic loss. In other words, soft tissue injuries and those types of injuries. So, no matter what the reason is, Mr. Speaker, one thing is absolutely clear, and that is that auto insurance premiums are rising. They are rising to the point where people can no longer afford to pay for auto insurance. Now, so the question is, how are we going to go about fixing it? How do you go about delivering a product that is compulsory for everyone who wants to put a vehicle on the road? And my friend from Colchester Musquodoboit Valley knows that the trucking industry is one that knows the effect that this has on the people who work in that industry, but also on consumers of other goods, because of course those costs have to be passed on to somebody, and they're passed on to the consumers. Mr. Speaker, I want to, for a second, I think I have some time left here. I want you to think about this. In rural Nova Scotia, doctors don't make house calls anymore, at least as far as I know. Maybe in some communities there are a few people who still do, but mostly they don't make them. And certainly when I was in Inverness in Richmond, they were telling me if they want to get to a doctor's appointment, they got to have a car. If they need to go to the emergency room, they need a car. If they need to pick up a prescription, they need a car. They need to go to the hospital, they need a car. If they need to go shopping, they need a car. They cannot live in rural Nova Scotia and not have a vehicle. There is no public transit system. They are dependent on their vehicle or having at their disposal the vehicle of someone else. So having affordable auto insurance is a very important thing for those people, because the only other option they have is to change their lifestyle and move to an area where those services are readily available. And where is that, Mr. Speaker? Well, that is, of course, in an urban area. And not everybody wants to live in an urban area, and certainly we shouldn't be forcing them to do that simply because they can't afford auto insurance. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to use just a few other examples. We had one of the people who came to our task force was a student who said that he was trying to save a little bit of money, so he decided to live at home, and rather than move into residence, his father bought him a car. Unfortunately, his insurance on that car was going to be $3,000. He almost was better off living in residence and not having to pay for gas and oil and maintenance and all the other things on top of automobile insurance. He's just trying to save a buck so he doesn't end up at the end of his university career deeply in debt. But because the auto insurance is so expensive, that's not going to happen. Mr. Speaker, business operators, I mentioned the trucking industry, but there are many others. Those who have small fleets of rental vehicles, for example, are finding their rates just simply going through the roof. So I think after we carry out an examination of this, we've come to a fairly good understanding of what some of the problems are across the province, but I think what is less well known is what the solutions are. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, they are not simply reduced to increasing the deductible. No question it's an option, but people should know that if you increase the deductible, where do you stop? Do you stop at $1,000 or $2,000 or $10,000? And when you put deductibles in place, it means that when you suffer a loss, you are not going to be fully compensated. That's what a deductible does. So there are limits on non-economic loss. You can cap the amount you can receive. Again, means you are not going to be fully compensated for an injury that you receive. Mr. Speaker, if somebody comes to your comes to your neck of the woods and they, through inadvertence or through negligence, injure you, I think most people think that, you know, if they're going to affect the quality of my life that way, certainly I should have the right to be properly compensated for it. I want to look at those are possibilities. The government can do that. There are others. For example, Quebec has a system which divides bodily injury into one category, which is government-run insurance for bodily injury. But the property damage section of the insurance coverage is still offered by private insurers. That's a possibility. I know many people I've talked to don't think that it's a particularly efficient system in Quebec, but certainly, Mr. Speaker, when I was down last night attending the Cooperators Annual General Meeting, they were talking about that as one of the solutions that could work if it was administered properly. And then, of course, Mr. Speaker, there is public automobile insurance, which operates in Manitoba, in Saskatchewan, and British Columbia. And unfortunately for this government, although they put out a document to talk about insurance, they didn't talk about that alternative at all. The reality is that public auto insurance has no government subsidies. It exists on the premiums. It's not for profit. It's not run by the government, Mr. Speaker. It's independent, not for profit, has an independent board of directors. And the whole idea, Mr. Speaker, is to reduce the actual cost of the auto insurance premium itself without limiting the benefits. And in fact, the automobile insurance benefits in Saskatchewan, many people would argue, are much better than they are as they exist here. The other point I'd like to make on this is that public auto insurers have a vested interest in public auto safety, right? Because a private insurer only has a small portion of the market. So because they have only a small portion of the market, there's no incentive for them to invest, or not as great an incentive to invest in road safety, because whatever they do is also going to benefit their competitor. A public auto insurer, every accident they prevent means that there's a claim that they're not going to have to pay. So they identify places where the roads are dangerous, where there are dangerous intersections, and they invest in road safety. So that's another aspect of public auto insurance that most people don't consider. Much more to say on another day, Mr. Speaker, but thank you very much.
The time allotted for this resolution debates expired. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call resolution number 443?
Resolution 443, the honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise to speak on Resolution 443. And for the record of Hansard, I want to make sure that the resolution is there, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, be it resolved that this House calls upon the Minister of Community Services to ensure that the safety and comfort of the residents of group homes by providing adequate funding to the Regional Residential Services Society so that it can provide workers with wage parity with hospital workers. And Mr. Speaker, I have to say that a number of those councillors for the Regional Residential Services were in the public gallery today, and they listened to the number of questions that was put forward to the minister. And then the minister channeled them off to the minister responsible for social services. A few of them had asked me why the Premier had not responded to those questions himself, and I advised him that the Premier has the opportunity to refer it to the Minister responsible for community services. However, that did not sit too well. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that I'm absolutely appalled at a government that places very little value on those citizens who are most vulnerable in our community. Those citizens who tend not to be the ones who go out there and vote is the ones who receive the least attention from this government. And Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you that that is grossly unfair, because those individuals, the vulnerable individuals in our society, need people to look after their particular needs. The people who look after their particular needs are very compassionate individuals, and they're very dedicated to the work that they do, Mr. Speaker. And this goes to the regional residential councillors very hard.
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They did not want to be out there on the picket line today. And this may not be important to members of this House, but it's significantly important to me, Mr. Speaker. So I would greatly appreciate it if members of this House paid special attention to this very important resolution. This resolution is not just simply a resolution that ought not to bear some attention in this House, Mr. Speaker. As a disabled individual, I find it somewhat affronting that, in fact, we sit here and we don't address issues of the most vulnerable individuals in our society. Those individuals are individuals out there with intellectual disabilities. And the counselors who are out there are doing a tremendous job on making sure that they deliver those kind of services, the dedicated and compassionate services to those individuals, Mr. Speaker. This government, Mr. Speaker, can go on and say, well, you know, as the minister can claim that his department does not get involved in these negotiations, yet he knows that his department provides the bulk of the funding to the regional residential services. And this minister knows that he can direct to the Regional Residential Services Society the way in which this government wants this issue addressed. All it takes is an action from the minister responsible. The minister says that it cannot be involved in conciliations. Well, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, the Local 66 union has said that it is prepared to accept to go into conciliations. It has asked the minister. Local 66 of this union, who represent these individual counselors, have done everything in their power to avert a strike. They've done everything, Mr. Speaker, and this Legislative Assembly ought to know that. They have put forward to government what it is willing to accept and where it is willing to go back to the negotiating table, and that it is willing to go back to the negotiating table and address these very issues. Now, the Minister of Community Services can continue to shirk his responsibility by not providing those additional dollars, but this will never, never, never solve the very important issue that's out there. The residential workers, the counselors, I will say, Mr. Speaker, are seeking wage parity. And they're seeking wage parity with their counterparts who are development workers in institutions. I don't need to tell the minister what those differences are between the development workers and the counselors, but I just want to assure the minister of some of the responsibilities. The job responsibilities of those counselors, Mr. Speaker, are dispensing medication, providing and purchasing groceries and clothing and household items and other essential goods. None of this is done by the development worker in an institution. Mr. Speaker, the dispensing of medication is done by a nurse. When in fact there are special needs by the individual is called a porter, and the porter takes that individual to their doctor's appointments, and the purchasing of their special needs are not there simply because the cafeteria facilities and the meals and so on are provided by other services in the institutions. Mr. Speaker, the counselors in the regional residential facilities across this HRM not only have the tremendous responsibility of doing that, they have to provide highly specialized medication, intervention and tracheometry care, tube feeding, care devices used to assist mobility, palliative care, and administer oxygen. All of this is done, Mr. Speaker, by people who are dedicated, compassionate, who care about their job, many of them who have had 12 and 15 years on the job, many of them who did not want to walk out there, but had to walk out there on the principle that they know the kind of job that they are doing for this community and the families, and today's families of this community, by providing the kind of services that they provide to those persons with intellectual disabilities. I don't know how many members have visited a group home, a small options home, or in a supervised apartment unit where persons with intellectual disabilities are in fact living. I've had the fortunate opportunity to go visit and see the kind of work that these individuals do. Mr. Speaker, it's day in and day out. The families rely upon these individuals to do the job that the family could never do. These individuals perform tasks that you and I would have extreme difficulty in trying to perform. Yet we don't see the dedicated effort that those individuals put in, and we ignore the level of money that they should receive on an hourly basis in respect to their counterparts. The minister also, Mr. Speaker, rose in this House and said that you know that we have done a lot for those individuals who are employed, those councillors who are employed in the regional residential services. He said when Service Exchange came into this province in 1993 under the Liberal government, that in fact there was a need to upgrade the skills and the certificates of these individuals, and it was also a need to bring in the wage parity and to bring in wage resemblance across the province. Well, Mr. Speaker, that was a commitment through the Service Exchange program of the previous government, which was endorsed by the government that's in power now. And Mr. Speaker, I commend the government on making sure that those balanced salaries were consistent across the province. There's no question. That was a good move. However, that's a few years ago. These individual councillors out here who have been out here walking the picket lines have been there for approximately 2 years. 2 years without a contract, Mr. Speaker. And 2 years in which this government could have turned around and decided to save enough money to put into a package to provide wage parity. This government boasts about Nova Scotians sharing in the wealth of a province that has turned the tide and brought in and eliminated the deficits and brought in surpluses to this province. If Nova Scotians are to share in the wealth, then surely the councillors who work after the most vulnerable individuals in this province ought to be able to be a recipient of the sharing of those wealth. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you that it continues to amaze me that the minister and his department claims that there's no way for them to be involved in the negotiating process. All the minister has to do, Mr. Speaker, is call up the board of the regional residential services and say, tomorrow, get back to the negotiating table. And if you don't go back to the negotiating table, we will impose conciliation upon you. We will impose an action by which you get back to the negotiating table and start negotiating this collective agreement, so that those individuals who are the most vulnerable in our society will not have to be out there beating the streets without providing the services to our citizens. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, as I said, this is a very important issue. It's one that touches my heart. I don't know how many hearts it touches the people across the legislative floor. But every one of us know or have a familiar relationship with someone who has an intellectual disability. We know the work that it's required, the kind of services and support programs, and the kind of work that an individual has to provide in order to make sure that those individuals are able to live from day to day to day to day. We know that this is not an easy task. This task requires the skilled individual as a counselor, the competency of that counselor, the understanding of that counselor, because it becomes a very, very personal issue when every day you have to do some very personal and provide some very personal and private services to those individuals with intellectual disabilities. Mr. Speaker, this government has to recognize that just simply because there's 250 members out there and that this is a small union, that it can certainly hold them out there on the street. And I hope the government is not thinking that, because those 250 councillors out there walking the street with those placards are the very people who would do the job, Mr. Speaker, that none of us in this legislative assembly would probably do. And Mr. Speaker, I think that when we look at the job descriptions of a development worker versus that of a councillor, you can certainly see why there is legitimacy in their wage parity demand. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to have an opportunity to speak about this a very important subject tonight. The Minister of Community Services is away attending a housing conference, so he will obviously would be dealing with this if he was here, but I'm pleased to have an opportunity to make a few comments. And I think the honourable member that just spoke said this is an important subject to him, And I can assure the honourable member that's an important subject to everybody, because the commitment that all of the members of this legislature have made to taking care of people who have not able to take care of themselves has been demonstrated time and time again by this legislature. But first, Mr. Speaker, let me say that this government and the Minister of Community Services is disappointed that the settlement couldn't be reached between the employer and the union. At the same time, though, we do respect the collective bargaining process and the employer's right to exercise their right under this Act. We do respect that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we know the situation has been difficult for both residential and their families. And the honourable member raised the question about whether anybody from the government had been to meet with the families. And as the minister had mentioned last week, he has had the opportunity to have a chance to meet with the families and indeed go to Simpson Hall and to look at those and to meet with them. And the other thing, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member raised the question, has anybody here been in a small option home? Well, I can assure the honourable member in my previous portfolio, I have been in small option homes, I have been in group homes, I have been in residential care homes, and I have had the opportunity. So, Mr. Speaker, I do believe, and I accept the honourable member's comments when he said people are very caring and very dedicated. I know that. I have seen that as he has. Mr. Speaker, what we have done previous to this, and the government has recognized their work and the value of their work. And the honourable member mentioned about the service exchange. Well, Mr. Speaker, that is true. But I will also say to the honourable member that this government over the last few years has put an additional $28 million into that sector over the last 4 years to enhance the salaries and staff of organizations like the RRBS. And the honourable member will know that. We've talked about that in estimates over the years. He'll be aware of that. During the same time, Mr. Speaker, we did enhance services through enhanced training efforts and staff and residents and training for staff and residents and training so that people would be able to provide better service. Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that the residents had to be moved from their institutions to smaller homes and to be moved to new places across the way. However, Mr. Speaker, the significant investment means that group home workers now have geographic wage equity across this province with their counterparts, and they now get an allotment of $28,500 for each full-time employee. We understand that a substantial offer has been put forward by the employer during bargaining. This offer includes a 6% wage increase over 3 years, increased contributions to the pension plan, and other group benefits, Mr. Speaker. Funding to support the RRS offer has been placed in this year's budget of community service. Mr. Speaker, this offer that we are talking about here has been accepted by employees of 3 other group home service providers across Nova Scotia. It's important to understand that the employers were putting their best offer on the table during the conciliation. They were trying their best to get a resolution to this. Although it is unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, to find ourselves in this situation, the Minister and Department staff of Community Services have been briefed regularly on their contingency plans. Care coordinators from the department have been set up, and they are visiting residents to ensure their care and residence is maintained. In fact, as I mentioned, the Minister himself had visited Simpson Hall and will continue to monitor the situation. And indeed, he will continue to talk to family residents to hear their concerns. We understand the residential regional rehab service is doing their best to keep families up to date and are sending regular updates to families. We know they are putting special care and sensitivity into meeting with these needs of the soul and the residents. We agree, Mr. Speaker, that residents should not be caught in the middle of this. This dispute is between the employer and the employees. Until the situation is resolved, community services' role will be to ensure the safety and well-being of the residents. We encourage any family members who have specific comments or concerns to contact their care coordinators. We understand that there is still a significant gap between the offer and the union's demands, and at the same time, Mr. Speaker, The IRS has offered the employees the same salary increase and benefits as agreed to other unions, and indeed are prepared to return to the table at any time.
On a point of order.
I apologize for interrupting the acting minister, Mr. Speaker, but it's very important that this be recorded on the table. The acting minister implied that, in fact, there was a pension plan offered to the individual employees who are in this bargaining unit of Local 66. My understanding, and the minister should clarify, that this is a contribution to an individual RRSP and not a pension plan as we envisage a pension plan to be. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the honourable member is quite right. The quite right is an RRSP plan. The point I was making was that it is not just simply a 2% wage offer over 3 years of 6%. There was other things that were added in there, other parts of the problem and other costs that were going to be attracted by the employer, and indeed other things that are at the bargaining table to be worked their way through. Mr. Speaker, I do, on behalf of the Minister of Community Services, say that this government does recognize that those people have a dedicated and valuable service. They do work in difficult situations, Mr. Speaker. They do work in opportunities where people are disadvantaged and they have to be able to provide for them. And that, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated earlier, is why the government put the additional money into that sector, so that we would be able to, these people would be able to continue their work. They would be able to continue to be able to provide that service for all those people that need it. Mr. Speaker, this is a time when it's very demanding for residents, it's demanding on the families, but it's my hope, and I know the hope of the Minister of Community Services, that the people will take the opportunity to go back to the table and work it out at the table between the employer and the employee, because that is the place where this should be resolved, Mr. Speaker. It's a contract that has to be developed. It's terms of reference, and the job descriptions have to be developed, and they have to be able to work out of those. For somebody to suggest that we should be intervening and we should be setting the terms and setting the standards they have, our standards are defined. The standards are defined by community services regulations. The standards are defined, Mr. Speaker. The standards of what people have to do is big. And those people across the province have to meet those standards, and indeed we provide the salaries for those service providers all across this province so they can meet those standards. Mr. Speaker, this is very important to residents and the members of their community, and we encourage the employer and the employees to return to the bargaining table to bring an end to this so all the residents can get back to their homes and their locations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise and join in this debate on Resolution 443. Mr. Speaker, the operative clause says, therefore it be resolved that this House call upon the Minister of Community Services to ensure the safety and comfort of the residents of group homes by providing adequate funding to the Regional Residential Services Society so that it can provide workers with wage parity with hospital workers. Well, Mr. Speaker, without a doubt, this issue by far proves how caring and compassionate this government really is. A mark of a caring government is ensuring that all of the residents receive adequate care in settings, Mr. Speaker, that they are familiar with during the time of a labour dispute. However, Mr. Speaker, reinstitutionalizing residents and separating residents from individuals that they have lived with for several years and probably longer is definitely not a sign of a kind and compassionate government. Mr. Speaker, this issue becomes more and more in focus every day. The government is looking at the residents and saying that their needs don't matter because they don't vote. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm here to tell you that their families vote and that the people of Nova Scotia vote. The people of Nova Scotia have been known time and time again to be kind and a compassionate people. But, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you they truly and honestly don't like what they're seeing. They see this government once again blaming the farmer government for all of their woes. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the commitment. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the commitment that the former Liberal government made to community-based options in the past. And I will not apologize for making an investment in this extremely important sector, Mr. Speaker. But I really resent a government that uses what we did as the previous government as either as a disguise to fool the people that they did something, or as an excuse for not having any flexibility to negotiate in good faith. Mr. Speaker, this government has no excuses. They themselves have not shown any commitment to community-based options at all. And it's no wonder, given the actions we are seeing here today. You know, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you remember in the rum bottle budget that was tabled here several weeks ago. Mr. Speaker, this government saw fit to give Nova Scotians, not all Nova Scotians,
Not the poor.
but they saw fit to give some Nova Scotians a $155 incentive to vote for them with a total price tag of $68 million, Mr. Speaker. But they can't, Mr. Speaker, they can't make an investment in the care and protection of our most vulnerable citizens in this province. But let's take a look for a moment what other priorities the Minister of Community Services has when it comes to his own department. He has no problem increasing administration in his budget to a tune of $4 million. However, he says he has nothing to bring to the table but 2%. Mr. Speaker, these group home workers who save the government money do yeoman service. They deserve to have the ear of government and be heard. They deserve to have any one of the options that they have laid on the table for government to be considered, seriously considered, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these workers have proposed many options to the Minister of Community Services and his department to avert a strike. They have proposed a joint job review process. They have proposed a joint conciliation board. They have proposed a phased-in approach to new wage settlement. And most recently, Mr. Speaker, they have proposed binding arbitration. But yet, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Community Services has refused to accept any of these options, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the last week, we've seen members who work with the Regional Residential Services Society outside the legislature, trying to call upon this government, trying to call upon our Premier, trying to call upon the Minister of Community Services to help to get these negotiations underway again. But nothing is happening. Mr. Speaker, why isn't there anything happening? Mr. Speaker, with all the $700 million Tory pre-elections announcements, and especially with all the rum bottle votes we've been hearing about, and I'm sure we haven't heard the end of those, you would believe that the Minister of Community Services and this Tory government would have taken another look, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that the proper care is given to these residents, and especially to make sure that these workers are listened to. But yet again, Mr. Speaker, nothing is happening. Nothing is happening in these negotiations. Mr. Speaker, this government has an obligation. They can't pretend that they don't have a responsibility. Mr. Speaker, the talks between the government and these group home workers has come to a stop. Mr. Speaker, the residents deserve to know that the people who care for them day in and day out are respected. The workers themselves, Mr. Speaker, deserve to be respected. The families, Mr. Speaker, would like to know that they are governed by a government who respects these group home workers and respect especially their loved ones. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, this Premier and this government, in true Tory fashion, have disappointed all involved. It is up to this government and to this Premier to start, recognizing that these workers and these residents and their families deserve respect. They deserve a government who won't blame everyone else but themselves for this situation. They deserve a government and a Premier who will call the Minister of Community Services and say, let's go back to the table with a new mandate and let's bargain in good faith. Mr. Speaker, I would like to go to one article that was in today's Chronicle Herald. And one family member, and I quote, it's time for Premier John Ham to step in, she said. He is the only one that can bring these two parties together and get all these helpless, vulnerable people back into their home.
Yeah, but he's Teflon, he's slipping.
I am so ashamed of this government, end of quote. And I'll table that after I'm done, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's many Nova Scotians that have been following this labour dispute. And they can't understand why this Tory government is not doing anything to help those most vulnerable in our society. Mr. Speaker, these residents, these families, and these group home workers as well can't understand why this Tory government is doing nothing. Mr. Speaker, I had a chance to meet with a group of these group home workers before the strike started. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt the dedication, the compassion, and the loving care they provide to these most vulnerable citizens in our society. Mr. Speaker, their dedication is certainly beyond the call of duty. Mr. Speaker, this date for renegotiating this contract cannot be a surprise for this government. They knew that it was coming 4 years ago. Why did they start to plan for the future instead of blaming others for their woes? Mr. Speaker, whether this government likes it or not, this is an issue of their own making. It's an issue that they must address. In closing, this government needs only to send a signal to the employer that they support them and get back to the bargaining table. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member, Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know, I want to rise here tonight and talk about Resolution 443, and in particular, I was quite amazed by the acting minister when he talked about respecting collective bargaining. Wow, what a difference a year makes. Here is a government that took on healthcare workers almost a year ago, or 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker. And then, while these people were in the middle of collective bargaining, with a basic, if that government had any knowledge or any concern for the bargaining process, they were in a blackout, a media blackout, trying to work towards a collective agreement. But what did the former Minister of Education do? Did that minister wait until to see if that could bear any fruit? No. He went out telling anybody that would listen is we've got a bill and they ain't striking. We're going to take their rights away from them. So, you know, it told all the members out there that it had been scuttled before they could try to get an agreement. That minister took the legs out from under them because that government wanted to show it was tough. It didn't care about people in hospitals, Mr. Speaker. It didn't care that the residual effect of Bill 68 would be that healthcare workers would leave this province. That healthcare workers really can't realize they can't rely on this government for support. But yet they went out and did this, Mr. Speaker. And then the gall of the acting minister to stand in this House today and tell us that they respect the collective bargaining process. Mr. Speaker, that is just a lot of phooey. Because, Mr. Speaker, I can't say stronger words in this House without being reprimanded, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member from Walmart Greeter is over there yapping. And we know where he stands on workers' rights. So, Mr. Speaker, what I want to talk about is, you know, I asked the Minister of Labour this week in estimates. I asked him quite honestly, I said, where is your legislation? What would you do around legislation for anti-scab? And his response to me about that and other items around whether it's the Trade Union Act or whether it's labor standards was to say, we don't have the process in which to get that through the House. We've got a committee looking at it, and it's such a large bill that we don't know what to do. Now, this is not such a large item, Mr. Speaker. Here's a government without getting a complaint from the casinos is going to bring in a bill to protect them right away. No worry. You know, how big's the check? Let me write it for you. If you're a big business, we'll look after you. But if you're a worker in this province, you're in trouble with this government. This government is coming in to almost its fourth anniversary in power. And it's going to be known as one of the most anti-labor governments we've had in this province in quite some time. It could have done things to help workers, but day in, day out. And this government refuses to see this. This government, I hear the former Minister of Health saying 6,000 more jobs. 26,000. Well, you should come to Cape Breton with me. Yes, now, and I'll put my, yes, and see how you closed the steel plant and how you didn't do anything for coal miners. I'll go toe-to-toe with you on that, Minister, if you wish on another day. But here we have, Mr. Speaker, we have these people on the street today. If this government had the intestinal fortitude to put some teeth in the Trade Union Act and banned scab workers from this province, then that employer would be at the table trying to resolve this. Instead, they've got people willy-nilly, they don't care. I heard the Minister of Community Service checking in to see what kind of qualifications these people they've brought in. No, it's just like, this is a third world country when it comes to labor relations. So please do not try to tell anybody on this side of the House that this is a great place in which to negotiate a collective agreement. It is a lousy place to try to negotiate a collective agreement.
What are they going to do if an issue comes again?
Well, if the Minister of Environment and Labour wants to get on the record, please stand up and do so. Mr. Speaker, we've asked this government, we've asked the Liberal government before it, to bring the Trade Union Act somewhere close to this century. You know, the last time the Tories and the Liberals did anything to do with in a substantive way with the Trade Union Act was to give us the Michelin Bill. They partnered up on that, and what they've done is look after the employer and not the worker. Why doesn't this government come in with something like that? Why doesn't this government admit to what its role is here? You know, Speaker, in the private sector, if the government was doing what it was doing, and if we had a decent Trade Union Act here, the union could very conceivably go and say, you're contracting out our work. That when all this stuff happened. The government wants to pretend that it has no responsibility at the table. But clearly, the dollar stops with them, Mr. Speaker. The minister talked about the offer at the table being a fair one and saying 2% plus, well, he didn't say it until prodded by the member from Dartmouth North, who had to bring it forward and say that's not correct. He said 2% plus a pension plan. It's not a pension plan. It's an RRSP, and some may say, well, what's the diff? Well, there's a lot of difference. There's significance, Mr. Speaker. This has no control by the Commissioner of Pensions. It's a private, basically, deal entered into between the employer and the employee, very away from the collective table. It's not a collective, if you will, Mr. Speaker, and it's open to the vagaries of the market a bit more. It's not a defined plan or a money purchase plan. So there's all kinds of problems there, Mr. Speaker. So if the employer was serious, there's no fence around it, Mr. Speaker. So why won't this government do that? Why wouldn't this government sit down with those workers and say, look, and the employer, and say, look, we're the ghost at the table. We're going to make ourselves known today to you, and we want to help you. If you're not going to give workers blanket coverage across this province in the collective bargaining system, what we will do is we'll own up to our own responsibility as the real employer. Because they can say what they want. The money comes from Treasury Board. It's their money. Finance signs the check. It's their money. You're at the table. It's like they're telling the RRSS to distribute it every way you want. We don't care. We don't care how you treat your employees. Just here's the check. Get out of here. And that's totally wrong. And for government to take that position is just incomprehensible, Mr. Speaker. Only way you could understand that, I suspect, is that it has no respect for the workers and, in essence, no respect for the residents. There's much been said. I mean, the minister said this quite clearly, that he worries and his concern is for the residents of these homes. Well, if he was really worried, he would get involved. This government would sit down in a meaningful way and try and resolve this impasse. Instead, this government has done nothing. This government is extremely, like I'll go back to Bill 68, we're extremely proactive in doing that. They knocked those negotiations off the rail and intervened in the collective bargaining process. But yet they'll stay here today that we're not going to touch the collective bargaining process. Well, I will say to this government, you can't cherry pick. You can't have it both ways. You can't, because of an ideological type of debate, to say, well, we're going to intervene because the healthcare workers was a much larger segment, and from philosophically, we're going to show the rest of Nova Scotia how anti-union we are. And then you can't piously stand up here 2 years later and say, oh no, that works tremendously. You can't get involved. The Trade Union Act and the collective bargaining process has to go on unfettered. That's not our role. No, not us. So which way is it, Mr. Speaker? You know, you're in it or you're on it, Mr. Speaker. So this government does not want to help these people. That's the only conclusion you can draw from their inactivity around this. The minister or the acting minister, whomever, and I say the buck stops at the Premier, that can get involved with this. They can sit down and try to find a resolve and tell those workers why they believe that a worker in one institution can make so much more than another doing the exact same work. For the minister to say other people have settled below that wage envelope, it's extremely unfair, because you don't know the amount of employees they have, you don't know the amount of work, you don't know where those people live, the idea of some place you may be able to buy a home for $25,000, where an appropriate home may be $90,000. So it's an unfair comparison to make to say that somebody has agreed to terms in this money envelope inside of what this group is offering. Well, you know, because these people have accepted, does it make it right? And you've got to look at that on an individual basis, and you can't put that to this collective, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, the government has a role. It is shown that it has a role. Matter of fact, it put itself in that role with Bill 20. But yet, when it comes to the hammer they can use through Bill 20, they walk away from it. So, Speaker, we have to come up with a rationale that shows that collective bargaining works across this problem. In particular, and I think more so because the government has to show leadership, is that they have to show that collective bargaining is fair and even. That, you know, that they can't pick and choose where they're going to get involved in the collective bargaining process. The government has the legal obligation, I believe, through the Department of Labor, through the employer, I think directly as community services, and then directly from the top, from the Premier, who can indeed bring his cabinet together and say, you know, we as an enlightened government who respect, more importantly, the residents of that home, that their care is carried on in the professional and caring manner that has been exhibited in the past by the workers, that we as a government have a responsibility to workers in this province that shows they, A, have the right to organize, and when they organize, they have the right to bargain collectively, and that if indeed the worst happens, and that is that they're putting in a job action situation, that there's not people from the outside affecting the outcome of that strike, i.e. anti-scab legislation, Mr. Speaker. If there was anti-scab legislation, Mr. Speaker, I would say that those people would still be at work today and there would be a collective agreement in force. I will tell this government in provinces where there was anti-scab legislation, they have some of the most respected picket lines, because people know that the right of anti-scab was given to them and they respect it. So, Mr. Speaker, this government has to start, instead of just putting it in words, putting in action, respecting, A, the residents of those homes, and just as important, respect the workers of this province, so that we can have a province that workers can be proud of and be part of. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Time's expired on debate on Resolution 443. Call upon the Honourable Government House Leader on tomorrow's hours and order of business.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, move the House to now rise to meet again on the morrow at the hour of 9 a.m. Following the daily routine, we'll go immediately into supply, and on the conclusion of 4 hours of supply, we'll go back and we'll revert to the orders of the day and go into question period. At the end of question period, Mr. Speaker, we will retire for the day. Mr. Speaker, I move that the House to now rise.
Motion is the House adjourned until 9 a.m. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Just before we go to the moment interruptions, I wanted to mention to the House that one of our pages, Irene Forsey, who's up in the gallery, this is her last day. Irene is from Port aux Basques, and she'll be leaving here, and she's graduating and going on to law school out west. So, Irene, on behalf of all the members, thank you for a great job, and good luck to you in your endeavors. We've reached the moment of interruption. Subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored to be here today and to take part in the late debate on the economy of Kings County and in general the economy of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, these are better days, better than they were in 1999 when this government came into power. The future is bright, and most people that we talk to are looking to the economy growing and things to keep getting better in Kings County, and of course that spins off into the surrounding area. Across Kings, the communities are growing, and we see economic development coming on in all areas. We can start in the West End, which I represent, and I've spoken about this before, but we have Greenwood, which of course continues to grow with over 1,500 military people. It's the third largest air base in Canada, and the largest on this coast. We had the Aurora and the Search and Rescue and the new Comrant there, and these add very much to our economy, and these people integrate so well with our whole community, giving us cultural and educational advantages that we wouldn't have without the military being there. We also have the military air museum in Greenwood, and of course we have the French school, which I'm pleased to say is getting renovations done that are badly needed. In Kingston, we can move out to the area where we've seen tremendous development in the last short while. Main Street development there has been exceptional. We look at the Superstore, the cash and carry, the Sears building, the Foster Insurance. These are all new facilities that individuals and corporations see that they can make a profit and that the economy is good, and they have faith in the economy, so they're investing in this area. And we see that